Jake Carter pressed his nose against the library window, his breath fogging the glass as his eyes followed the limping figure making its way down the street. Rain fell in unforgiving sheets, drumming against the pavement like impatient fingers. The man moved slowly, each step deliberate, as if the weight he carried wasn't just physical, but something deeper, something that clung to his soul. At 10 years old, Jake knew heroes when he saw them. His bedroom walls were plastered with posters of soldiers, his bookshelf lined with military history, dog-eared pages marked with sticky notes in his meticulous handwriting. But this was different. This wasn't a story in a book or a character on a screen. This was real. Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you are subscribed, because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. The veteran's name was Daniel Reeves. Everyone in the small town of Millfield knew who he was, but few knew what to say to him anymore. He'd returned from overseas 3 years ago, his body broken but somehow still standing. His uniform had been traded for civilian clothes that hung loose on his frame, medals exchanged for prescription bottles that rattled in his pockets like hollow reminders. Jake watched as Daniel stopped at the corner, wincing as he shifted his weight. The rain had soaked through his jacket, but he made no move to hurry. It was as if the weather matched something inside him, relentless, cold, unyielding. That's the 3rd time this week you've watched him. Mrs. Henderson, the librarian, spoke softly behind Jake, making him jump. You know him? Jake shook his head, reluctantly peeling himself away from the window. No, ma'am, but my dad says he's a hero. Mrs. Henderson's face softened, lines etching deeper around her eyes. He is, but sometimes heroes need heroes too. Later that afternoon, Jake sat cross-legged on the floor of Millfield's only diner, listening, as his mother wiped down tables after the lunch rush. The bell above the door jingled, and Daniel Reeves stepped inside, water dripping from his jacket onto the worn linoleum. Just coffee today, Sarah, he said to Jake's mother, his voice rough like gravel. That's all I can manage this month. Jake watched his mother's face, saw the way her smile faltered. On the house, Daniel. You know that. Daniel shook his head. Can't keep taking charity. He placed a handful of coins on the counter, the metal dull against the laminate. It's not charity between friends, she insisted, but Daniel was already turning away, his gaze catching Jake's for just a moment. In that instant, Jake saw something that the posters on his wall had never shown him, the cost of heroism etched into the lines of a face, the shadows under eyes that had seen too much, and in that moment something shifted in Jake's young heart. Heroes shouldn't suffer alone. Thunder rattled the windows of the Carter family home, nature's percussion accompanying the storm brewing in Jake's young heart. For 3 days straight, he'd barely touched his dinner, his mind consumed by the image of Daniel Reeves. The way the veteran's hands had trembled as he'd counted those few worn coins, the quiet dignity in his eyes, despite everything life had thrown at him. Jake sat cross-legged on his bedroom floor, surrounded by military action figures standing in formation. But tonight they weren't engaged in battle. Tonight, they stood witness to a different kind of bravery. The blue ceramic piggy bank had been a gift from his grandfather on his 5th birthday. For 5 years, Jake had fed it religiously. Birthday money, allowance, the $5 Grandma slipped him every Sunday after church. Each coin and crumpled bill represented something he'd been saving for. The Deluxe model aircraft carrier he'd circled in catalogs, dog-eared the pages until the corners were soft as fabric. His fingers traced the cool surface of the pig, feeling its weight. 5 years of dreams and discipline. Honey, dinner's getting cold, his mother called from downstairs. Jake didn't respond. Instead, he reached for the small plastic plug on the pig's belly, hesitating only for a moment before pulling it free. The sound of money cascading onto his carpet filled the room. Nickels, dimes, quarters, and bills unfurling like small green flags of surrender. When he appeared in the kitchen doorway, his parents turned from the dishes they were washing. Jake stood there, arms straining under the weight of a shoebox, overflowing with his savings. "Jake, what are you doing with your money?" his father asked, drying his hands on a dish towel. "It's for Mr. Reeves," Jake said, his voice small but certain. "The veteran from the diner." His mother knelt down, her eyes level with his. "Sweetheart, that's all your savings. You've been putting away money for years." "He needs it more than I do," Jake said simply. His father joined them, placing a gentle hand on Jake's shoulder. "Son, that's incredibly generous, but that's your money. You worked hard for it. Are you sure you want to give away all of it?" Jake looked up at his parents, his eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond his years. The rain beat against the kitchen window, but inside, something warm and powerful filled the space between them. "Dad, he gave everything for us," Jake said, his small voice steady and clear. "His legs don't work right anymore because he was protecting people like us. The model ship can wait. It's just a thing. This is..." He struggled to find the words. "This is the least I can do." His parents exchanged glances over his head, something passing between them, pride mingled with awe at the heart of the child they'd raised. "Well," his father said finally, voice thick with emotion, "I think we need to pay Mr. Reeves a visit tomorrow." Thunder rolled again, but this time it felt less like a warning and more like applause from the heavens. Saturday morning dawned bright over Millfield's annual spring festival, the town square transformed by colorful booths and the scent of cotton candy hanging sweet in the air. Flags fluttered in the gentle breeze, a sea of red, white, and blue, in honor of the festival's theme, Hometown Heroes. Jake Carter clutched the shoebox to his chest as if it contained something far more precious than money. His parents walked beside him, exchanging nervous glances above his head. The weight of the box seemed to grow with each step, not from the burden of coins and bills, but from the enormity of what he was about to do. "There he is," Jake whispered, spotting Daniel Reeves sitting alone at the edge of the festivities. The veteran sat ramrod straight despite his injuries, watching children chase each other across the grass, their laughter carrying on the wind. His cane rested against the bench, a reluctant companion. Something in his eyes seemed distant, as if part of him was still somewhere else, fighting battles only he could see. Jake approached slowly, suddenly shy in the face of his hero. His mother gave him a gentle nudge forward. "Mr. Reeves." Jake's voice cracked slightly. Daniel turned, recognition flickering across his weathered face. "You're Sarah's boy from the diner, right?" Jake nodded, his heart hammering against his ribs. The festival sounds faded to a dull roar in his ears as he held out the shoebox, its lid slightly askew, revealing the treasure within. "This is for you, sir," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "For your medical bills. It's my savings, but I want you to have it. Because heroes shouldn't have to worry about stuff like that." Daniel stared at the box, then at the boy, confusion giving way to disbelief. His hands that had once carried weapons, had pulled fellow soldiers to safety, trembled as he reached for the box. "Son, The words caught in his throat. He opened the lid fully, revealing years of a child's careful saving. "I can't accept this." "Please," Jake insisted, his eyes bright with determination. "You fought for us. Now let me fight for you." The veteran's composure cracked, a single tear carving a path down his cheek. Around them, the festival continued, but a small circle of onlookers had formed, drawn by the tableau of the boy and the broken warrior. A woman in a floral dress raised her phone, capturing the moment as Daniel pulled Jake into a fierce hug. The shoebox balanced between them. "Thank you," Daniel whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you for reminding me why we serve." As they pulled apart, applause erupted around them, startling both. Jake blushed, suddenly aware of the crowd. An elderly man wiped his eyes. A young mother explained in hushed tones to her curious daughter, and somewhere in that circle, a retired firefighter named Ellis captured it all on his phone, thumb hovering over the share button. "People need to see this," he murmured to himself. Pressing send. People need to remember what matters. Ellis Thompson's weathered thumb had pressed share without a second thought. The retired firefighter had simply wanted to show his fishing buddies what real courage looked like. He never imagined what would happen next. By Sunday morning, the video had already traveled beyond Millfield's digital borders. A community page shared it, then a veterans group, then another and another. Like wildfire across dry grass, the image of a small boy with a shoebox and a broken warrior embracing spread across screens nationwide. 10-year-old donates life savings to struggling veteran, read the first headline. The video didn't show much, just 37 seconds of raw, unfiltered humanity. No fancy editing, no soundtrack, just Jake's clear voice saying, "You fought for us, now let me fight for you." And Daniel Reeves' walls crumbling before a child's compassion. In Washington, D.C., a news anchor wiped away a tear before introducing the segment. In San Diego, a naval base fell silent as sailors gathered around a tablet, watching in reverent silence. In Chicago, a radio host played the audio, his usual sarcasm replaced by a voice thick with emotion. "We're seeing something remarkable happen online today," the host said. "In an age where we're divided on everything, this is bringing people together." The comment sections, usually battlegrounds of bitter arguments, filled with a different kind of fire. How do we donate? Where can we send help? This child has more wisdom than our leaders. I served with men like Daniel. This breaks my heart. By Monday morning, the local news van parked outside Daniel's modest apartment found itself competing for space with 3 national networks. Reporters scribbled furiously in notebooks as neighbors shared stories about the quiet veteran who never asked for help. A donation page appeared, created by a veterans organization 2 states away. The goal was set at $5,000, enough to help with immediate medical expenses. By noon, it had reached $50,000. By dinner, $120,000. Meanwhile, 3 blocks away, Jake Carter sat at his desk at Millfield Elementary, his pencil tapping against his math worksheet as he stared out the window. The problems before him seemed distant, unimportant compared to the image of Daniel's face that kept appearing in his mind. The moment when the veteran had looked at him, not as a child, but as an equal. "Jake," his teacher called, pulling him. "Back to the present. Focus, please." He nodded, unaware that his name was trending across the country, unaware that in break rooms and living rooms, at military bases and in corporate offices, people were watching his simple act of kindness and finding something they desperately needed: hope. His phone-free existence, his parents believed 10, was too young for social media, had created a peculiar bubble around him. While the world discovered Jake Carter, Jake himself remained blissfully unaware that his small hands had started something massive. In his bedroom at home, the empty space where the piggy bank had stood remained vacant, but something else was filling up instead, something invisible but far more valuable. Sarah Carter stood frozen at the kitchen sink, the morning coffee forgotten in her hand as the windows began to vibrate. A low, rhythmic rumbling filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't thunder. The April sky outside was clear blue, unmarred by clouds. It wasn't construction, not at 7:15 on a Tuesday morning in residential Millfield. "Robert," she called to her husband, her voice barely audible above the growing noise. "Robert, something's happening." Upstairs, Jake stirred from sleep, the rumbling pulling him from dreams of model airplanes and distant battlefields. He rubbed his eyes, confused, as the family dog began to bark frantically from the backyard. The sound became clearer now. The unmistakable cadence of marching feet, hundreds of them moving in perfect unison. The synchronized heartbeat of something massive approaching their modest two-story home on Maple Street. Robert Carter reached the window first, pulling back the curtain. What he saw made him stagger backward, his morning paper dropping to the floor. "Sarah, Jake, you need to see this." They gathered at the front door, three silhouettes framed against the morning light as Robert pulled it open. The rumbling stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it felt like the whole world was holding its breath. Their front yard, their entire street, had transformed overnight. Hundreds of uniformed men and women stood in perfect formation, creating a sea of dress blues and camouflage that stretched from the Carters' front porch to the edge of the neighborhood. Some wore the crisp uniforms of active duty, others the casual attire of veterans marked only by caps and patches that told stories of wars fought in distant lands. Their faces were solemn, proud, eyes fixed forward in parade ground perfection. At the front of this human ocean stood Daniel Reeves, standing straighter than Jake had ever seen him, his cane nowhere in sight. Beside him, a tall woman with silver stars on her shoulders, a general, Jake realized with awe, recognizing the insignia from his books. What is this?" Sarah whispered, her hand finding Jake's shoulder and squeezing tight. As if in answer, the formation moved. Each soldier, in perfect unison, raised their right hand in a crisp salute directed at the small boy standing on the porch in Iron Man pajamas. "Jake Carter," Daniel called out, his voice stronger than it had been in years, carrying across the hushed gathering. "These men and women have come to thank you," the general stepped forward. "Young man, in my 30 years of service, I've witnessed courage on battlefields across the world, but sometimes the greatest acts of bravery happen right here at home." Her voice carried the weight of command, but her eyes were gentle. "You reminded all of us what we fight for." Jake stood motionless, his young mind struggling to comprehend the ocean of uniforms before him, all those eyes, proud, grateful, some glistening with unshed tears, focused on him. "But," he managed finally, his voice small in the vast silence, "I only gave him my piggy bank." A ripple moved through the formation, hundreds of battle-hardened warriors smiling at once. The morning sun caught on polished medals and brass buttons as the general stepped forward, her shadow stretching across the Carter family's front lawn. The birdsong had fallen silent, as if nature itself was paying respect to the moment unfolding. On this ordinary suburban street, "Attention!" The command rang out, sharp and clear. The formation snapped even straighter, if such a thing were possible. Hundreds of spines aligning in perfect unity, shoulders squared against the weight of wars, remembered and battles yet to come. In their midst, Daniel Reeves stood among his brothers and sisters in arms, his posture mirroring theirs, shoulders back, chin high, the broken warrior finding his strength again in this ocean of solidarity. Jake Carter descended the porch steps, slowly, urged forward by his father's gentle hand on his shoulder. The grass was cool against his bare feet. He hadn't even stopped to put on shoes. His Iron Man pajamas fluttered slightly in the morning breeze, the superhero emblem a stark contrast to the real heroes standing before him. The general's eyes that had overseen operations in distant deserts and faraway mountains, softened as they met Jake's. She knelt down on one knee, bringing herself to his level, a gesture of respect rarely offered by someone of her rank. "Jake Carter," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "I speak for everyone here when I say that your action has reminded us of something essential, something we sometimes forget in the chaos of duty." She paused, choosing her words carefully. Compassion isn't measured by size or strength or age, it's measured by heart. From behind her, an officer stepped forward carrying a small wooden box. He opened it with ceremonial precision, revealing a medallion gleaming against dark velvet, not a military decoration in the traditional sense, but something created just for this moment. "This isn't a military medal," the general explained, taking it from the box. "Those are earned through different kinds of courage, but this was commissioned last night by every unit represented here today." The medallion caught the light as she held it up, a simple circle of silver engraved with the silhouette of a child reaching out a hand to a soldier. It reads, "For Jake Carter, who fought with his heart." With solemn dignity, she placed it around his neck. Then, rising to her full height, she stepped back and rendered a perfect salute, a gesture typically reserved for fellow officers or fallen comrades. Like a wave, the salute spread through the formation, hundreds of hands rising in unison, honoring not rank or position, but the purity of a child's compassion. "Daniel has been one of our own since long before his service ended," the general said. "And now, so are you, Jake Carter. Not a soldier, we hope you never have to be, but a patriot nonetheless." Jake's small hand rose, trembling to his forehead, returning the salute as best he could, tears streaming down his face as he looked to Daniel, who stood tall among his comrades, pride and gratitude radiating from him like warmth from the sun. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The soldiers, the family, the quiet street, all held in the amber of a perfect moment when divisions fell away and humanity shone through with blinding clarity. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, bathing the extraordinary gathering in golden light. The formation of soldiers remained at attention, a sea of uniforms standing proud on the modest lawn of Maple Street. Neighbors had gathered on porches and sidewalks, witnessing history unfold in their quiet community. As Jake stood clutching his medallion, the weight of it against his chest, feeling somehow both heavy and weightless, a staff sergeant stepped forward. In his hands, he carried a large envelope, its official seal catching the light. "There's something else, son," the general said, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "Your act of kindness inspired far more than just our presence here. Today." Daniel Reeves moved forward to stand beside Jake, his hand coming to rest on the boy's shoulder. The touch wasn't just for support. It was a bridge between generations of service, between sacrifice given and sacrifice recognized. "Jake," Daniel said, his voice steady now, stronger than it had been in years. "When you gave me your savings, you thought you were helping with my medical bills." He paused, emotion threatening to overtake him. "What you didn't know is that you started something much bigger." The staff sergeant handed the envelope to the general, who opened it carefully before kneeling once more before Jake. "Your video reached people across the country," she explained. "Not just military personnel, but civilians, families, children like you. People who wanted to help but didn't know how until they saw what you did." From the envelope, she withdrew a document and held it up for all to see. The total amount raised in just 48 hours is $387,450. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers. Sarah Carter's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilling freely down her cheeks as Robert pulled her close, his own eyes glistening. "This covers all of Sergeant Reeves's medical expenses," the general continued. "Past, present, and future. The remaining funds will establish a foundation in your name, Jake, the Carter Compassion Fund, to help other veterans facing similar struggles." Daniel knelt beside Jake, their eyes level. "You gave me everything you had," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "and look what happened. You inspired an entire nation to do the same." Behind them, Sarah and Robert Carter stood on their porch, arms around each other, watching their son's small act of kindness ripple outward in ways they could never have imagined. Robert's chest swelled with a pride so intense it was almost painful, while Sarah's tears fell unchecked, each one carrying away the worries she'd harbored about their future, about raising a good man in a complex world. "I just wanted to help," Jake said, his voice small but clear in the morning air. "I didn't do anything special." The general smiled, rising to her feet. "That's where you're wrong, son. In a world that teaches us to look away from pain, you looked directly at it. In a world that teaches us to hold tight to what we have, you gave freely. That isn't just special, it's extraordinary." Around them, the sea of uniforms remained steady, a living monument to the power of one boy's heart. Morning mist clung to the ground as the Carter family's car approached Fort Braxton, the massive military installation that had always loomed as a distant, mysterious presence on the horizon of Millfield. Jake pressed his face against the window, eyes wide as the guard waved them through with a crisp salute, a gesture no longer foreign to the boy who now understood its weight and meaning. "They're all waiting for you, buddy," his father said, glancing in the rear-view mirror at his son, whose Iron Man action figure had been left at home today. Jake didn't need pretend heroes anymore. He had met real ones. A welcoming party stood at attention as their car pulled up. Daniel Reeves at the center, standing tall in his dress uniform, medals gleaming across his chest. The veteran who had once struggled to stand now carried himself with renewed purpose, his eyes clear, his smile genuine. "Welcome to our world, Jake," Daniel said, kneeling to shake the boy's hand properly. "Today, we show you what your kindness has helped protect." What followed was a day that seemed plucked from Jake's wildest dreams. A massive Humvee, its metal hull scarred from deployments in distant lands, rolled to a stop before him, its door swinging open in invitation. "Your chariot awaits," laughed a sergeant, helping Jake climb into the towering vehicle. The base opened itself to him like a living museum. Pilots in flight suits showed him the cockpit of an F-15, explaining each button and switch with patient detail. His small fingers traced the sleek metal with reverence, feeling the power humming beneath its surface. "This is how we guard the skies," a captain explained, helping Jake try on a flight helmet that swallowed his small face. Tank commanders let him peek inside their armored giants, the smell of metal and diesel fuel creating memories his young mind would carry forever. In the mess hall, he sat surrounded by soldiers who shared stories, not of battle but of brotherhood, of lives saved, of hands extended in peace to children in far-off villages. As afternoon shadows lengthened across the parade ground, Jake stood watching a precision drill team perform, their rifles spinning in perfect synchronization, a dance of discipline and honor. His parents stood beside him, witnessing something transforming in their son, a deepening, a straightening, a quiet resolve taking root. "Mom, Dad," Jake said finally, his voice soft but certain, eyes never leaving the display before him. "One day, I want to be like them." Sarah and Robert exchanged glances over their son's head, recognizing that the boy who had emptied his piggy bank was gone. In his place stood someone new, someone who had glimpsed the true meaning of service and found it calling to him. Daniel watched from a respectful distance, his hand unconsciously touching the spot where pain had once been constant. The doctors had told him the procedures covered by the donation would finally end years of suffering, but the healing had started long before any operation. It had begun the moment a child had seen his worth when he had forgotten it himself. "He already is like us," Daniel murmured, pride swelling in his chest. "He already is." Millfield Elementary's assembly hall buzzed with whispered excitement. Hundreds of children fidgeting in their seats as Principal Winters adjusted the microphone stand. Sunlight streamed through high windows, dust motes dancing in golden beams that seemed to spotlight the empty chair on stage. "Students," the principal began, her voice cutting through the chatter, "today we have a very special guest, someone who knows what true courage looks like." The side door opened and Daniel Reeves entered. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the hunched posture, the pained grimace, the hesitant gait. He walked with purpose now, each step steady and sure. The medical procedures had worked wonders, But those who knew him best understood that his greatest healing had come from somewhere else entirely. Jake sat in the front row, his classmates casting glances his way. They all knew the story now. It had been impossible to miss. His 15 minutes of fame had stretched into weeks as the Carter Compassion Fund had grown, helping veterans across the country. "Good morning," Daniel began, his voice carrying easily across the hushed room. "My name is Sergeant Daniel Reeves, and I'm here to talk about courage." His eyes found Jake's in the crowd, and a silent understanding passed between them. Most people think courage is something big and dramatic, storming beaches under enemy fire, running into burning buildings. Daniel paused, letting his words settle. And sometimes it is, but more often courage is quiet. It's a boy emptying his piggy bank for a stranger. It's seeing someone in pain and deciding to do something about it. As Daniel spoke about his recovery, about the foundation that had grown from Jake's gesture, about the veterans whose lives had been changed, he kept returning to one theme: how a single act of kindness could start a chain reaction that no one could predict. "In the military, we have a tradition," Daniel said, reaching into his pocket. "When someone does something extraordinary, something that embodies our highest values, we give them this." He held up a gleaming coin, its edges catching the light. "It's called a challenge coin. This particular one belonged to my commanding officer in Afghanistan. He gave it to me when I carried a wounded brother half a mile to safety. Today, I'm passing it on." Jake approached the stage, his steps echoing in the silent hall. Daniel knelt down, not from pain as he once would have, but from respect. "This is yours now," he said, pressing the coin into Jake's palm. His voice pitched. "For Jake alone. Not because you're perfect, not because you're a hero, but because when it mattered, you chose kindness." Jake's fingers closed around the metal disc, feeling its weight, the weight of history, of honor, of a tradition he was now part of. "What started with you hasn't ended," Daniel continued, addressing the entire assembly now. "The Carter Compassion Fund has helped 37 veterans so far. But more importantly, we've received letters from children across the country who've started their own kindness projects. A chain reaction that began with one boy who saw someone hurting and decided to help." As Jake returned to his seat, clutching the coin tightly, he realized something profound. The greatest gift hadn't been what he'd given away. It had been discovering that even the smallest hands could help carry the heaviest burdens. As the sun sets over Millfield, casting long shadows across the town that will never be quite the same, we're left to wonder about the true measure of impact in this world. How do we calculate the worth of a single act of kindness? How do we trace its ripples as they expand outward, touching lives in ways we could never predict? Jake Carter didn't set out to be a hero that day. He didn't empty his piggy bank for recognition or fame. He simply saw someone hurting, a warrior who had given everything for his country, and decided that he couldn't look away. In the world that often teaches us to mind our own business, to protect what's ours, to walk past suffering with downcast eyes, a 10-year-old boy showed us a different path. The statistics tell one story: $387,452 raised. 37 veterans helped. One man's medical bills paid in full, a foundation established. These are numbers we can count, outcomes we can measure. But the true legacy of Jake's gesture lives in places statistics can never reach: in the restored dignity of a forgotten warrior, in the renewed faith of a cynical world, in the hearts of children who now understand that their small hands can move mountains. Daniel Reeves stands straighter now, his pain eased by procedures he could never have afforded on his own. But ask him what healed him most deeply, and he won't mention doctors or medications. He'll tell you about a boy who saw his worth when he had forgotten it himself. We pass thousands of people in our lifetimes. Some are carrying visible burdens, a veteran with a cane, a mother with tired eyes, a child with worn-out shoes. Many more carry wounds we cannot see, grief hidden behind smiles, struggles concealed by pride, battles fought silently behind ordinary facades. Each one is an opportunity to be someone's Jake Carter, to offer not just money or time, but the profound gift of being truly seen. Our veterans deserve more than our words of gratitude. They deserve our actions, whether it's a donation to a support organization, an hour spent volunteering at a VA hospital, or simply taking the time to listen to a story that needs telling. Each gesture matters. Each kindness counts. As you go about your day, remember Millfield. Remember Jake and Daniel. Remember that heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear Iron Man pajamas. Remember that the most powerful force for change in this troubled world has always been and will always be the simple decision to care. If this story moved you, be sure to subscribe to our channel for more moments that remind us of our shared humanity. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in goodness again, and most importantly, carry its message forward, not just in words, but in the choices you make each day. Because in the end, we're all just walking each other home, and kindness lights the way.